much for joining us today for our REI Live updates with Mr. Chad Gates. He is a real estate attorney located out of Sarasota, Florida. We're so excited to have him with us and tell us a little bit about kind of what's going on with coronavirus and what's the best way to own assets and conduct business. How are you doing, Mr. Gates?
Good. I didn't know that's what we're talking about, but happy to go there. So what do you want to talk about? Tell me that again.
I want to know, because it's been a couple months since we last connected about the courthouses and judges and how they're conducting businesses. Because last time we talked, they were starting to open up, but they weren't quite all there.
The courthouse is still basically closed, except all hearings are done telephonically.
Okay.
Most non-essential things aren't being done. All the jury trials have been pushed off probably the next year by the time everything gets going. Haven't really heard a lot about evictions. I know there's some things going on with the eviction stay was supposed to end, I think, today, but we heard there might be something coming down that's going to extend that. Not sure if it's just going to be for federally insured mortgages or all mortgages. From what I'm being told, most of the attorneys aren't even trying to go in and get evictions right now. Just doesn't seem like the judges are really open to do much with those.
So how are some of your clients handling that? If there's a situation where people aren't paying, is there anything that they can do?
As of now, no. Try to pay them to get out. Try to convince them to leave on their own. But you know, what I'm hearing is most people are paying. Very few people aren't paying because I think even people who don't want to pay are afraid if they don't pay that they could be evicted, and they don't want to move during these unknown times. So from what I'm hearing from most of my clients is that they're almost 100% being paid unless they've done some sort of an agreement with the tenant to allow them not to pay. But most of the agreements I'm also hearing about are in the commercial context, not in the residential. Seems like most of the residentials are being paid and people are not causing any problems in the residential side. I think some of us do have a few tenants here and there that are playing the game, but you know, now it's kind of hard to claim you can't afford it when you're getting all this money from unemployment, but that all ends today too, I think, or the end of this month. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next month and if that default rate goes up from there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So everything is kind of back to normal, or still functioning business, correct?
I mean, in the closing side, it is. I mean, we're as busy as we've ever been. I mean, I got 4 closings today, so things are moving along. I think we'll probably do 15 closings this week and 35 or 40 for the month in total. Some of those pretty significant closings. I've had a couple $3 or $4 million closings on the residential side. I've had some $3 or $4 million commercial closings. So things are moving. From what I'm hearing, you know, there's a shortage of product on the market. So the things that are on the market seem to be moving pretty quick. And for top dollar, you know, what I see my practice is all the petty bullshit that we used to see between people arguing about, you know, minor little repairs or whatever it may be, that I spent a lot of time dealing with are not here anymore. They seem to gone away. You know, everything seems to close without a lot of issues, and everybody seems to want to work with each other, and it just seems to be a much easier process right now. I don't know if it's this pandemic or everybody's scared or there's not a lot of product out there, so nobody wants to lose the deal. But it seems to be a pretty easy transition through the closing process that we're seeing. The only real problem that we've had is the lenders are just overwhelmed. You know, I had a closing yesterday and literally didn't get the package until almost an hour after the lender had scheduled a closing because they were too busy to drop a package to us. So that's the biggest problem is things are being pushed off because these closings that have loans involved, the lenders aren't able to get them closed and funded on time. It's not the fault of the buyer, the seller, the agents, or us as the closing agent. It's because the lenders just are too busy.
Yeah, I can see that. But they're still lending, and they're still, I feel like every rates that I've seen are starting to come down, and they're starting to.
Yeah, rates are really low. I mean, I did one 2 weeks ago for a VA loan. The guy bought down the rate to 2% on a 30-year fix. which is probably the lowest I've ever seen. But typically we're seeing rates between 2.75 and 3.5 all day. So it's yeah, rates are cheap. It's funny, people are talking about bad rates being in the 4% range, and I remember when, you know, anything under 7 was a great rate. So it's kind of interesting when people have that mindset. But, you know, the lower the rates go, the more people qualify for mortgages, because the you know, the low debt or loan to debt to income ratios come down, because the mortgage takes up lesser amount of their income, so more people are qualified because of that. So we're seeing people that typically wouldn't qualify being able to qualify for houses because the payments are so much lower because the interest rates are so low.
Yes. And I just got an email that said that there are some lenders that are going back down to like the 620 credit score. So that's really exciting for people that are looking to get into their first time home or get into that type of situation.
I mean, you know, when we get a loan package, it always has credit scores in it. There's a disclosure they have to give, discloses credit scores, and I'm surprised I see people below 620 getting mortgages right now. So, you know, especially the first time home buyers, it seems like it's a little bit different on that one. They're a little bit more lenient, especially if there's a spouse that has better credit than the other. But credit doesn't seem to be a big issue. And like I said, you know, the rates are down and people are buying everything, it seems like. I know Mark and I just put 2 houses on the market. They both sold within a week. So, you know, I'm surprised with that.
That's exciting.
Yeah, I guess.
Well, it's better than having them sit there for a long time. So I'm excited
Well,
for
I
you.
mean, you know, you always think, or you always wonder when you put a house on the market that sells the same week if you underpriced it, you know, or is it just priced right? But you know,
We're
they
going
got
with
the
you.
prices for both of them, so we're happy with it.
Yeah, we're going with you. All are the experts and you priced it just right.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's what Mark thinks. Right?
So while I have you, I've had quite a few questions over the last couple of weeks about owning properties and the different types of entities. Can you dive into that a little bit for us?
Yeah, on the investment side, we usually see a few different ways to structure properties. So you never really want to own a property in your personal name unless it's a second home or your primary residence. Any type of investment property where people are coming and going, especially short-term rentals or even long-term rentals where you're renting to a third party that has guests over. You want to own those as an entity that kind of creates a liability blanket between you and your assets in that property in case something would happen there. So typically we see either an Inc., a corporation, or an LLC, a limited liability company. In Florida, we like limited liability companies because they're just easy to manage, and they give you some asset protection ability. So most accountants will tell you to use an LLC, and you can actually choose to be taxed as an S corporation inside that LLC or a partnership. But you know, 99% of the entities we do now are LLCs in Florida. Some people like to use land trusts for one reason or another. Land trusts don't really have that asset protection quality to it, so we don't really like those unless we're using an LLC as the beneficial interest in that land trust. But everything basically is done through LLCs anymore.
So what would be the difference between an LLC taxed as an S corp and when you'd want to use that corporation structure or a partnership?
I don't do tax work, so I can't really tell you. I just know my accountant tells me to use it. Tells me which one to do. So you know, it depends on what the LLC is doing, and my understanding is it depends on what the LLC is doing and whether or not it's going to be passive or active income. So if you're actively working in a business, rehabbing houses and selling them as your business, I think you want to be taxed as an S corp. If you're just a passive investor buying and renting properties and not flipping a lot of things or turning them over, probably as a partnership. But we always recommend you ask your accountant to make that determination for you, so we don't have to. What was the other part of your question?
Well, are there any protections that are different between those two?
Between a corporation and an LLC?
Yeah, the S corp.
I mean, yeah, well, you can be taxed as an S corp inside an LLC and also be taxed as partnership. You have to choose which one of those you're going to do. As a corporation, you can be taxed as a C corp, or elect to be an S corp. The difference between a corporation, for our purposes, is there's no intangible tax on assets owned by an LLC in Florida, whereas there's an intangible tax on assets owned by a corporation in Florida. So my understanding of that is some of the things inside a house, like appliances and stuff like that, might be taxable under some circumstances. So I'm not really an expert on that. I just, use them because that's what they tell me to use. What we do know, or what I do know about LLCs versus corporations is back when everybody was struggling and getting judgments against them and still trying to buy property, an LLC has a unique provision that allows us to protect the shares of that company from claims of a creditor. So if you own a property as a C or as a corporation, S or C, and you were to get a judgment against you, that judgment holder could exercise against the shares of that corporation that you own. So if I owned a C corp and I owned 100% of it, or all the shares of that corporation, and I got a judgment against me, that judgment creditor could sue me and take possession of those shares. Therefore, they would now have possession of that property and ownership of that property. Okay. With an LLC, they can't do that. They can only get what's called a charging lien against your membership interest. So they get a charging lien against my membership interest, but that charging lien would not allow them to get to the property. It only allowed them to get the property if I were to sell it or if I were to take income out of it. But there's some ways around that too that some really smart people come up with to get around that. So LLCs give us a lot more protection when it comes to creditors coming after us than corporations do.
And I haven't heard anything about a sole proprietorship. Do we not like those, or what are the pros and cons of that?
Well, it depends. I mean, if you're in business, you could be a sole proprietorship as a business. If you're selling widgets out of your house, you can sell them as an individual or a corporation, whatever you want. Most people usually start out selling them as an individual and then eventually go on to having some kind of a company. But when we're buying real estate, we never want to own real estate and in our personal names unless it's our primary residence or maybe a second home. Rental property, any commercial or residential, vacation rentals, all that should be owned in LLCs. So that's the difference between a business and ownership of property.
And does each rental property need a separate LLC, or can you own multiples inside of one?
You can own multiples inside of one. That's always the question everybody asks is how many properties do you put into an LLC? And George Babiglio has kind of told me that he thinks the magic number is 5. I don't know how he came up with that or what that means, but to me, it depends on the asset and how much equity is in the asset. If I have 2 or 3 houses that I own free and clear that are each worth $200,000 or $300,000, I certainly don't want to risk. If I have 3 houses at $300,000 each, that's $900,000. I don't want to risk $900,000 over one house having a judgment come in against it. So to me personally, if I have houses that are free and clear and they have that kind of equity, I'm probably going to use a different entity for each one of them. If I have a bunch of entities that have mortgages against them, it's sucked all the equity out. I probably put multiples into one LLC. Typically, I use one LLC for everything unless I buying something that's got multiple units to it, like a 6-plex or a 4-plex or something like that. I'll create a new LLC just for that property. If I'm flipping things, I usually just go through one LLC that I have.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I've had like 15 questions over the last 2 or 3 weeks about owning property, so I figured I'd just be better to ask you about it. So, what can you dive into a little bit about trust, the difference between irrevocable and revocable trust, and the pros and cons of those? I know that they're quite expensive to set up.
I get into the estate planning area, which I don't really do, but I'll give you my limited knowledge on it. So, revocable versus irrevocable basically is what it says. One can be revoked and one cannot. So most trusts that we do are revocable trusts. So if you go get estate plans done and they put a trust in there, they have a trust called the Gates Family Trust, the Chad Gates Family Trust. That trust is revocable and I can amend it anytime I want. And upon my death, it gets funded and then tells my trustee how to deal with my surviving spouse and my kids. Whereas an irrevocable trust is typically a very sophisticated type of trust that is used in a very limited circumstance regarding estate planning and planning regarding Social Security benefits or Medicare benefits. So and I don't do any of this as an elder law specialty that I don't really never done and don't have any desire to do. But in some circumstances, people with assets who are trying to qualify for Medicare to get into nursing homes and things like that have to divest themselves of the assets, and they do that through a revocable or irrevocable trust. So that's the only time I've ever seen them really used.
Okay. Leanne has a question for those outside of Sarasota area. What's the best way to find a good real estate attorney? Well, hold on. I can answer some of that because Chad can help you with all Florida. I know that answer.
Yeah, I can, and I can also refer you to people sometimes outside of Florida. I think it depends on what you're doing. If you're just looking to buy a house for your own use and you're only going to buy one house, ask somebody that you know in town who to use, or ask the realtor or multiple realtors who they like, but always use an attorney. I mean, it just drives me crazy that people use title companies and there's no reason to. I mean, everybody thinks if they use an attorney for a closing, it costs more. It doesn't. The rate's set by the state and we charge the same amount. But I have a client in every transaction. That's that my person who engages me. Where title companies don't. They represent the lender most of the time. And it just, I don't understand why anybody want to go to a title company and deal with them when you can hire an attorney, be me or somebody else that has experience and you know them and all that kind of stuff. So if you're looking for an attorney, I started asking the realtors and mortgage brokers and other people that you trust in the area about who's doing them, especially if it's just like for one house. If you're looking to get an attorney for your investment portfolio, REIAs or REIA Lives are great places to find guys who are attorneys that are focused on investors. And I do both. I have an investment side of my practice. I have a lending side of my practice where I represent banks, and I have a residential closing side of my practice. And they're all distinctly different in what's being done. And the mindset of a real estate attorney and for real estate investors is completely different than the mindset of real estate attorneys that's doing residential transactions for closings for individual buyers. On the investor side, you need somebody that understands what investing's like and how difficult it is to find a property and not to say no when somebody comes to you after they find a property and something needs to be changed in it, or it needs to be massaged, or they want a wholesaler, or all these different weird things that we deal with. We can't blow that transaction up. We have to keep that transaction alive. And so many real estate attorneys that don't understand the investor side of it don't want to deal with that. So I think that's the key, is if you're looking for an attorney in another state or another area to do, you're getting into the wholesale business or you're getting into the retail side of it where you're buying and rehabbing and selling properties, find somebody that knows the business, find somebody who's done it. I mean, I've done hundreds of houses myself, so I have an understanding about all these things and what happens when people get involved in this. And I think that's unique, and there's not a lot of attorneys that have that, but you can find somebody in almost every state or every location that has that same type of expertise.
Are there any questions that you recommend investors asking attorneys as they interview the process, just to make sure that they're not good talkers?
I mean, yeah. First of all, you need to know if they understand. I want to know who the other how many other investors they have and what kind of products they're doing or what kind of volume they're doing. Ask other investors. That's another great thing about going to either REIAs or REIA Lives or some of these other real estate meetings, is that there's people there that are doing multiple deals. I know if I were looking to start in any other location other than Florida, I'd find the biggest guy there is doing the most deals and try to copy what he's doing. So the first person I would call is whatever attorney he's using, because that person probably knows what's going on best for that jurisdiction. I mean, I get a lot of business because people look up Mark Pellis's name and see my name on the deed, and they call me because they figure, heck, I'm doing that many deals for him. Maybe I can help them out too. So I think that's a great way to look at it. If you're getting involved with an attorney that doesn't understand the investment side of it, I think you're going to have problems, because you're going to end up having to educate that person as to what they're doing and how to do some of these strange things. I mean, think about, you talk about an ABC closing where, the the buyer is buying it, but he assigned it, but the money's coming from the assignee and all these things. I mean, there's certain ways to do that that make sense and keep you from getting in trouble. And I think, it's easier to deal with somebody who's already done that a couple hundred times than it is to try to convince an attorney that hasn't done it how to do it and that it's okay to do.
Absolutely. I think we have about 5 more minutes of Chad's time. Does anybody else have any questions that we can get answered for you? I'm going to post in the chat box right now. And while everyone is here, we are recording this, so I will be uploading it to YouTube by Friday, and I'll send you an email once I get it uploaded for anybody to re-listen to if you guys missed some notes.
How they ask you questions? By text, email? What are they doing?
The chat box. So I'm getting ready to post it right now. Please post here. Sometimes when I try to type and talk, I end up typing what I'm saying instead of what I'm
We can
trying
go a
to.
little longer too if you guys need to. I got a little time today.
Okay. The only other question that I saw come in was, and I think you did cover it, I know that, but since we have a little bit of time while we're waiting on people to post questions, benefits of having an S Corp over an LLC.
Say it again.
The benefits of having an S Corp over the LLC. I know that we already answered that
We
once.
just talked about that. I mean, it's basically the asset protection side of it, in my opinion, and the fact that you're not taxed on it for intangible tax for assets that you're owned are probably the two biggest benefits. LLCs also give us the ability to change a lot of things and do what we want to do. So, there's really no structure that you come up with that we can't document in an LLC. That's not, and all that's allowed. So it gives us a lot of flexibility when we're bringing in partners or doing different things. We can mix up ownership interests. We can have a member that owns more but gets less as a distribution and all that kind of stuff. So it's very flexible, and it just seems to be what everybody is doing right now. So.
And there's no delays with getting those LLCs filed and created, correct?
Well, there is right now. I mean, it used to be we could file for an LLC, pay the filing fee online with a credit card, and have it opened and approved by the state the same day. Now, I mean, if you go on the state's website, actually tell you how many days back they are. But most of the time, it's at least 2 weeks. Sometimes it's up to a month or longer. So this causes a real problem because investors, especially as the normal cycle of a wholesale deal with a lot of investors is they put it under contract, they try to wholesale it. If they can't wholesale it, then they make a decision they want to buy it themselves, and they'll want to put it into a new LLC. And typically we don't know that until a day before the actual closing. If that's happening and the LLC has not been formed, it's not going to be formed. And will not be approved prior to the closing. So there is a lead time now of a couple of weeks, I'd say. We need to form those a lot earlier than we used to.
Okay, that's good to know because I didn't realize that it was that backlogged with the state. What are the costs? This came in from Leanne. What are the costs for setting up an LLC, and what are the subsequent costs to maintain it?
So we charge $653 to set up an LLC. That's the filing fee and the attorney's fees to put it all together, and that includes filing for the EIN number with the federal government and the basic operating agreement. On an ongoing basis, every year you have to file an annual report. I think that's about $150 a year for that annual report. And if it's owned by more than just you or you and your spouse, you'd have to file a tax return for that. If it's owned by the two of you, it's probably going to be what's called a disregarded entity, and all the income will flow down to your tax return on one of the schedules.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I feel like we get this question every time we talk. So Wesley's heard that there's benefits to setting up a company in Delaware for real estate. Is that better than Florida?
I've never figured out a reason why you would. I think, as you go and you listen to, and I go to a lot of seminars and listen to a lot of real estate people talk, and they're always talking about their favorite place to start these LLCs. And, you hear of Montana and Wyoming and Nevada, Arizona, Delaware, and it goes on and on. And, it used to be Delaware was the only place to do it, and I don't know why people are doing it. It seems like it's very sophisticated, high net worth individuals were doing that for a reason. I know a lot of people in the investment side of it are trying to go to Wyoming because Wyoming uh, there's I guess a greater ability to hide who you are and what's going on. Plus, there's no usury in Wyoming, so a lot of people who want to loan money at higher rates think that they use a Wyoming corporation, they can get away with that. Not really sure that works either, but I've never really figured out a reason why you'd want to incorporate it out of state and then own property in this state. Florida's liability, Florida's laws are pretty good for businesses when it comes to these LLCs, and I think for me the ability to bank an LLC is pretty important, and banks like to see LLCs that are in the state of Florida. If you're in the state of Florida and buying property in the state of Florida, so Delaware is a pretty well-known one, so you can probably get away with that. But if you start getting some of these other states, I think people start asking, especially on the banking level, why are you doing that? What are you trying to hide, and all those kind of things. So I've never seen a real reason to have anything other than a Florida corporation or LLC.
Now, if I was going to do a house here in Tennessee, would I want to set up a LLC here in Tennessee, or what are the views on that?
I mean, I think I probably would. When I'm looking for a place out in Colorado, I'm probably going to set up a Colorado LLC to do that. I mean, I'll talk to an attorney out there, and you should probably talk to an attorney in Tennessee to see if there's any benefit or any reason why you shouldn't have an LLC in Tennessee. But to me, it just seems to make sense. Now, I mean, if you live in Florida and you're buying an investment property up there, you might want to use a Florida LLC just because you understand the laws and the rules related to that LLC here. And it can be administered here. If you have a Tennessee LLC, you're going to have a Tennessee attorney most likely, and all those other things that go along with that. So, I don't know. I think if you live in a place, you probably should think about doing LLCs in that state, unless there's a real reason not to. They get taxed for a reason or whatever it may be.
Okay, very good. Well, I know Tennessee doesn't have an income tax, so that's a plus.
Yeah, it's a good plus.
So Scott has a question. If you move out of your primary residence and make it into a rental, can you transfer that property into an LLC?
Yes, you can always transfer the property. It's just the issue there is whether or not you have a mortgage on a property, and there typically is a due on sale provision in all mortgages. So technically, the sale of the property from yourself to an LLC, or to transfer the property from yourself to an LLC, would be a violation of that due on sale clause inside the mortgage, for which the lender could hold you in default and call the mortgage due and eventually foreclose if you don't refinance it or pay it off. Most lenders don't do that. I've never seen one who has done that. As long as the payments are being paid, they're fine with it. That LLC would take that property subject to that mortgage. So that mortgage is still a valid mortgage. It had to be dealt with upon sale or refinancing. But you need to know that there is an outside possibility that that mortgage could be called due underneath that provision. There are some typical doc stamps you have to pay too for that transfer. So if they had a mortgage, you got to pay doc stamps related to the amount of the mortgage. If the ownership's not exactly the same as individually into the LLC, you'd have to pay doc stamps on that too. So there's some intricacies you'd have to talk about regarding that.
Okay, very cool. I haven't heard that answer to that question yet, so that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Are there any other last questions before we let Chad get on with the rest of his day and his 5 closings? That's exciting. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, that last question that brought up something I saw a couple times this last couple months is if you own a homestead and you move out of that homestead, let's say you have a property in Florida that's your homestead, you move to Tennessee like you're thinking about doing, buy a place up there and never remove the homestead for your property down here. I've seen it. I mean, people do it all the time because it keeps the tax lower, and they think it's perfectly fine to do because nobody's going to find out. Well, they will find out, and they have been finding out. And Sarasota County and a lot of other counties in the state of Florida have actually entered into partnership agreements with a couple major companies that's all they're doing is checking the tax rolls and checking your homestead against other homestead in other parts of the jurisdictions in the country. If they find it, they'll come back and the penalties are significant. So, if you're abandoning your homestead, you need to notify the county of that and remove the homestead exemption from it. We've also had a couple cases recently where people had rented out part of their property either through Airbnb or, you know, they had a guest house out back and they were homesteading the entire property, and the county has come down on them for that too. So if, you know, if you're Airbnb-ing out part of your house, that portion of your house should not be part of the homestead exemption. It should be exempted. It should be excluded from the homestead exemption. And what's happening is, you know, the county now, because they have an agreement with Airbnb to collect all their sales tax and remit all the sales tax, now, you know, the county and the state has evidence of who's using Airbnb on their houses. And if you got a house that's homesteaded and you have an Airbnb receipt going to the Department of Revenue, they can cross-check that and you can end up in trouble. So be careful.
No, absolutely. So Michael has a question. So on subject twos, will the buyer taxes jump up unexpectedly if it was a homestead property?
Well, every time a property is transferred, the property appraiser reassesses that property. So, you know, typically with a homestead property, the assessed value is much lower than the just value. So if you go onto the property appraiser's website, I think I had one laying around here. There's a couple different things that they're showing there. They're showing you the just value of the property, which is the value that they assess it as of this year. And then they show you the assessed value, which is what it is assessed at, subject to the limitations under the Florida Constitution for your homestead. And that difference can be significant. You could have a $200,000 assessed value and a $500,000 or $600,000 just value on a property. So if I buy that property, the filing of that deed, the recording of that deed is going to trigger the property appraiser's office to look at that and reassess it. So immediately upon that deed hitting, they're going to look at that and reassess it for the next tax year at the current rate. So all rates are set January 1st of every year, and that rate is good through the entire year. So if the property is sold halfway through the year, they're not going to reassess it for that tax period. It gets reassessed January 1st of the following year, but it will go to the just value at that point in time. So where we see it happen, or where we see the problem a lot of times, is in escrows related to people borrowing, you know, for a mortgage on your house. So you borrow, you know, you get a mortgage for your house to buy it, but they require you to pay escrows for taxes and insurance. And the taxes a lot of times are calculated based on the taxes for the seller of the property. The current taxes on the property is what they use. And you can have a situation where they're being taxed at a rate that's significantly lower, and then when the taxes come out the following year, they're significantly higher, and there's not enough money in the escrow account to cover that shortfall. So that's why, you know, these escrow accounts get recalculated on a yearly basis.
Good to know. Okay. I don't see any other questions. So with that, thank you so much, Chad, for joining us today. We really appreciate your knowledge and you taking the time to speak with us and share it with us.
I appreciate it.
You have a wonderful rest of your day, and congratulations.
Take care.
Closing.
All right, bye.
Bye, y'all.